and fries and cherry pies. It was simple and good back then.
Burgers and fries have been a fixture of North American diets for generations. But today's burgers and fries are far from simple, like the life singer Tommy Overstreet is singing about in that clip.
The drive-in picture show, and it was burgers and fries and cherry pies in the world we used to know.
I'm Laura Rance, Vice President of Content for Glacier FarmMedia, and this is our weekly podcast, Between the Rows. Today, as you might have guessed, we're talking about burgers. Well, actually, we're talking about plant-based proteins that are increasingly finding their way into burgers. I'll be speaking to Laura Rance, one of the lead researchers at the Washington-based Good Food Institute, about why it's been hard to get consumers to buy into plant-based proteins. Spoiler alert, it's partly because people want them to taste more like meat.
People will pick up those products because of that novelty, because they understand the sustainability, because they understand the health aspect. They'll pick it up one time, but if it's too expensive or it doesn't taste good, they're not picking it up a second time.
Later in the show, I'll be sharing a conversation I had with Daniel Metheringham, Vice President of Agriculture for global French fry maker McCain's. It's working with growers and Farm Credit Canada to stabilize potato production in the face of climate change using regenerative agriculture.
Regen ag, for me personally, there is an environmental benefit, but it's also about assuring the food supply chain.
But first, here's a word from our sponsor.
Save money, make money with AGI Nico dryers. AGI Nico mixed flow screenless dryers provide 1 to 2 pounds heavier test weight per bushel and require less maintenance than screen dryers. Stainless steel fuel trains mean no rust or corrosion to worry about. AGI Nico Dryer Manager puts remote management and monitoring in your hands. And with 30% in fuel savings, you'll save on every load. That's money in your pocket. Visit aggrowth.com/Nico for more info. That's aggrowth.com/Nico.
I'm Laura Rance, and this is Between the Rows. Every time I go into the grocery store, I'm amazed at the range of new food options taking up space on the shelves. Many of those new foods, even the ones that look and sort of taste like meat, originated as plants grown by the likes of prairie farmers. The industry has clearly come a long way from the days when eating plant-based foods meant beans, lentils, chickpeas, and tofu. But as the Good Food Institute's Laura Rance told the Plant Forward Conference in Toronto recently, the sector still has a long way to go before it becomes a mainstream food choice for consumers. The Good Food Institute has a mandate to promote plant-based meat alternatives as good for the environment and our health. I started our conversation by asking Laura to tell me why there's so much interest in plant-based proteins.
So when it comes down to it, we're going to have to feed 10 billion people by 2050, and that's going to require way more food than we have now. And looking particularly at protein, demand is going to increase about 50 to 100% by 2050 as a result. And if we look at the way that we're making protein right now, that increase is almost impossible without looking at other protein sources that we have beyond that, that don't put as much stress on the environment. And the reality is that industrial animal agriculture does use 75% of agricultural land, yet only provides about 33% of global protein supply. On top of that, we also see that industrial animal agriculture is also responsible for about 14.5% of greenhouse gas emissions, which is higher than the entire transportation sector combined. And at least in the US, animals do consume 2 times more medically important antibiotics than humans do. So now imagine again, we're in 2050, we have this booming population. There's 50 to 100% more protein than what we have right now. So essentially that means that protein supply in 2050, we're looking at it, a third to half of it is coming from something completely new that we haven't seen yet. So that either means we optimize animal agriculture or we build more resilient systems as well at the same time. There's definitely room for both of these things, right? So in order to build a more rigorous, resilient system, we do need that variety. And I think people are starting to realize that we do need more protein variety beyond the more traditional animal sources. And especially now, you know, with climate change and pandemics and recessions and wars and everything putting so much strain onto our supply chain systems and our agricultural systems, we just need more of this resilience. We need something else to really buffer what we already have while we continue to worry about making our current systems even better too. And the reality again is that plant-based meat production requires 44 times less land, 50 times less water, and 41 times less greenhouse gas emissions than conventional beef production. So we really want to be able to get those same nutrients without putting so much pressure onto our agricultural system, so that we really can get to a point where we can feed everybody and get that protein supply demand on everybody's plates by 2050.
I grew up with a little recipe book called Recipes for a Small Planet that focused on plant-based protein. But in those days, it was peas, beans, lentils, chickpeas. Now we're talking about something much more sophisticated. I mean, how far have we come down this path?
Yeah, it's really interesting because since these 2.0 products have come out, we really haven't seen consumers evolve too much, just because we're like in the first inning of the game, you know, when it comes to these 2.0 products. But yeah, traditionally plant proteins have been more viewed as options for vegans and vegetarians. So we had tofu and tempeh and beans, and right now we're looking at these consumers that yearn beyond this, and they are realizing that from a sustainability point of view, that conventional meat isn't really the ticket. However, they do want to still have the good tasting meals that they're used to. So they want this in between of, yes, we want to look at plant proteins, but can we make them just a little bit tastier and fit into our meals that we know and love a little bit better? So these 2.0 products have been coming out that you're talking about, these Beyond Burgers and Impossible Burgers, and they're really meant to completely mimic those meat products, so that people who sit more on the fence and they don't want to necessarily go completely vegan or vegetarian, which is totally understandable. It's very, very difficult to do in this day and age. They can still pick a sustainable option without missing anything from their meals. And obviously we have a long way to go on creating even more varieties so that people can feel that convenience even more so. But I think that's where consumers are evolving right now, and we're going to see even more evolving. But that part of the sector is just so brand new that we're just seeing the first glance of what this could look like.
So where has been the growth been the strongest, and where has it been kind of static?
Plant-based milk and other dairy products, as well as eggs, have been growing so much over the past few years. So plant-based egg sales grew 42% last year, and milk, it was a more modest 4%, but still a growth. And just for comparison, conventional egg sales diminished 4% last year, and conventional milk diminished 2% last year. So we're definitely seeing a lot of growth in these sectors of the more, I feel like they're the 2.0 products that are getting even newer right now, and they're even more novel right now and getting into people's plates and faces a little bit more. Where we're seeing a little bit of stagnation is actually in the meat category, and this is across plant-based and conventional meat. So both plant-based and conventional meat saw 0% growth last year. So that's definitely a place where we could be working across the board in those meat sectors.
What are the key factors holding people back from taking more of this into their diets?
Yeah, so people are definitely recognizing, again, those sustainability factors. Additionally, even the health aspect, plant-based meat products have been shown to be healthier than conventional meat products. So people are starting to realize that health and environmental sustainability point of view. But people will pick up those products because of that novelty, because they understand the sustainability, because they understand the health aspect. They'll pick it up one time, but if it's too expensive or it doesn't taste good, they're not picking it up a second time. So really what drives the repeat consumer purchases are tastes and costs. And we can't lose those on products, even as we think about the health aspects and the sustainability aspects. Because again, no one's picking up a product, they say it tastes bad, and then they pick it up again. Nobody's doing that. So we really need to be able to meet on that point. And recently we have seen in the industry, some products are getting rushed to market because we need those investments in the sector. We need those dollar sales growth, but this can lead to some kind of subpar products that not only turn off consumers to that product, that brand, but the whole entire sector as a whole. So we really need to focus on getting good products on the shelves and not turning people off and holding the sector back or keeping it stagnant, because really new things aren't coming out, tastier things aren't coming out, cheaper things aren't coming out. We're just kind of seeing the same thing over and over again, or even those subpar products.
And you also mentioned price as a factor. How close is are these products to reaching price parity, or even something close to price parity with conventional meat and dairy proteins?
Yeah, so recently Boston Consulting Group and Blue Horizon put out a report. It was in 2021, and they projected that plant-based meat would reach price parity with conventional meat by 2023. And given that 2023 is less than 2 months away, this is definitely ambitious. But I think we are seeing some good examples that give hope to at least it being on the horizon, maybe not 2023, but very, very soon, maybe 2024 even. So for example, the Netherlands did recently reach a point where price parity was met between conventional and plant-based meat because of the rising costs of conventional meat products due to the supply chain restraints that they were seeing in the price volatility. And that conventional animal agriculture price volatility is pretty ubiquitous. So at least in the US, beef, pork, and chicken prices grew respectively 26, 19, and 14% higher from October 2021 to prior to the pandemic in January 2020. So we're definitely seeing these prices rise. And at the same time, as plant-based meat scales, we're definitely going to get cheaper and cheaper products. We have so much growth to get to a lower price point there that we'll kind of see this meeting in between of conventional meat products maybe getting a little bit more expensive as plant-based meat products get a little bit less expensive.
So the industry is kind of fracturing into some of these different niches, but you're seeing this sort of start to occupy more of a, would you say it's mainstream at this point, or is it getting close to mainstream place?
I don't think it's mainstream yet. I think we're close to mainstream. I think maybe we'll hit that curve of adoption soon. But I think that we're still, again, in that first inning of the game. We're really only capturing about 1 to 2% of the whole entire conventional meat market with plant-based meat right now. And to me, 1 to 2% is essentially a rounding error. And again, by 2050, we're looking at almost half of our protein supply is going to be coming from something completely new. So 1 to 2% right now is really way, way too little. I think once we hit 5%, that's when I'll start maybe calling it more mainstream, but I'm really hoping that we'll get to that point soon. I think we're pre-mainstream. I think we're almost there. We can taste it, but we just need that nudge in the right direction, a little bit more investment and more infrastructure to get to that point.
Is the pace of innovation and investment in this sector robust enough to support the kind of timelines you're looking at for 2050?
To be frank, no. We did a model earlier this year that looked at if the plant-based meat market was 6% of the conventional meat market by 2030, what would that look like in terms of infrastructure and ingredients? And we projected a number of potential constraints, both in ingredients, so like pea proteins and coconut oil. As demand increases, we'll definitely see constraints on those ingredients. So we need to think of more diverse choices there. And then on the infrastructure side, we projected that we would need $27 billion more of investment into 800 extrusion facilities, not 800 extruders, just facilities. So this is on a multiplying factor for actual extruders. And we're really nowhere near that. And if we want by 2030, those extruders to produce 6% of the plant-based meat market, we need that $27 billion, not by 2030, but much sooner so that we can actually build that infrastructure. So the reality of it is that we are really behind and we need more investment, both from the private side, but then also from the government. We need governments to step up and recognize, hey, by 2050, we need to figure out where half of our protein supply is coming from. Agricultural land isn't growing anymore. It hasn't in the past 30 or so years. how are we going to do that without actually expanding what we have or thinking differently? We need to think differently on top of improving our current systems. And I think the government needs to step in to do that.
Do you see, from your organization's perspective, the opportunity or the likelihood that plant-based proteins will ever completely displace animal agriculture, or do you see it occupying a bigger space and a diminished reliance on animal agriculture as we go forward?
Yeah, I definitely see it as we go forward, we have to be realistic with the way that people want to eat, with people's current livelihoods. We need to make sure that it's a just transition in every sense of the way, that everyone is being brought along for the ride. I do think that no matter what, we will have to have it supplement. I believe that if people think by 2050 we can produce protein in the same way that we do now, that's not only naive, but really dangerous. I think we'll actually be putting more constraints onto animal agriculture if we continue the way that we're doing things now, rather than keeping them the way that they are right now and then supplementing with more of that growth. So I guess my roundabout answer is that I do see it more as a supplementation, but I think the end goal should be that we're putting less reliance on things that put so many externalities onto our environment. And that's the direction we should be going continuously. And we should always be looking at what that means in our time in history. And right now, I think that means plant proteins.
So you're really looking for a new equilibrium, I think, or a new balance between how we balance the protein needs of our diet against the environmental needs and the constructs, I guess, of our cultures.
Yeah, absolutely. And even looking at animal agriculture, there are so many ways to improve it so that there is more land for animals to be grazing, and there are reduced constraints on their feed, and they'll be able to actually have feed in a sustainable manner. And in order to even achieve those goals, we do need to look at how we can modify our whole animal agriculture system. And I think part of that is supplementing it with plant proteins so that we can improve animal agriculture at the same time. And I think that they go hand in hand.
Thanks very much for joining me today.
Yeah, I appreciate it so much. Thank you for inviting me, and chat anytime with you.
Vera Paneski was one of the keynote speakers at the recent Plant Forward conference in Toronto. Now, let's turn our attention to French fries. Canadian-based multinational McCain's is on a mission to bring regenerative agriculture to the potato business. It recently announced a unique collaboration with Farm Credit Canada to offer farmers financial incentives to grow potatoes using more sustainable practices. Regenerative agriculture focuses on improving soil health as a way of building resiliency into production systems. The French fries produced from those healthy soils won't likely taste any different, but we'll all feel better about eating them. I spoke to Daniel Metheringham, Vice President of Agriculture for McCain's, to find out more. When I hear McCain's, I think of French fries. Why is the company investing so heavily in regenerative agriculture?
So for me, we work directly with farmers all across across the globe. We work directly with farmers, but ultimately, regenerative agriculture for me is about assured supply. So if we talk about regen ag, what does that mean? Well, every year, our growers hitting their budgeted yields, not necessarily just on potatoes, but on all crops. And what we've seen over certainly the last 5 to 10 years is really increased volatility with climate events. And what we've got to do is say, well, what are the reasons? What can we do to really make a difference? And honestly, our journey on regen ag and everything that surrounds sustainability is all about building more resilience into the supply base, into the farmers' operation, armoring the soil so we can basically, those weather events, when they happen, we can bounce back quicker. So regen ag, for me personally, there is an environmental benefit, but it's also about assuring the food supply chain.
So there's a very strong business case for this.
I believe so, yes. I think, I'm going to say a really corny line, and I'll apologize for it up front, is sustainability has to be sustainable. And if we just put money into a fund, a scheme, yes, it's great and growers would be able to use that. But then when you pull that money out, are those practices going to be continued to be used? And if the answer is no, well, it's not really tangible. And I think it's really important that the things that we've built, and certainly around our sort of regen framework that we rolled out last year, is these are sustainable practices over the medium and long term, will allow farmers to build greater resilience to their soils, and also the economic. So again, their budgeted yields that they aim for each year are more achievable, and more years than not, they actually achieve those, which again, it assures that supply and secures the food supply chain.
Do you think the consumers care?
I think it's a journey in the same way. I think there's more awareness. I think with the inflationary pressures that we're facing currently, I think when there's again one of these extreme weather events, it increases. It hurts all of our back pockets. So I think as we're looking at different generations, without a doubt, I'm going to say the younger generation, and that's very sort of stereotypical, but I think there is a real want from businesses to share their sustainability practices. But I think, again, there's a long-term business case that is financially viable for us all to care, because ultimately, if we don't invest into our farmers, into the food supply chain, it's going to impact us all at some point.
What kind of barriers do growers who do want to incorporate some regenerative practices into their system, what kind of barriers do they face?
So what I would say to start with is growers. I honestly believe, having spoken, we have an advisory board, but I speak to a lot of growers every single day. Growers are already on this journey. I've not met a grower yet who said they don't want to invest in their soils, they don't care about their soils. They really do. It's something that's been passed from generation to generation. It's important. It's the lifeblood of their business. So, and we see some great work against our framework. We see growers. Okay, we see some growers on the onboarding factor, but we also see growers on the expert side of the framework. So, farmers definitely want to go on this journey. But there's two pieces. The how do I do this? And we've put a lot of time and effort into our Farms of the Future in Canada, which shows best practice. We're actually launching what we're going to call an innovation hub in Manitoba. So that's going to be, again, sharing some of those best practices. The growers can come and physically see practices to do. And then there is the financial side. So the financial side, there can be some hurdles, and that's where really this scheme comes into its own. That yes, it's against lending, but it's looking to incentivize growers who want to go on that journey, and as they move through the different stages, they can unlock further investment. So investment is a barrier. It's not huge because, like I say, I honestly believe in the long term there is a payback from a business point of view of that supply. But as they go on that journey, there will be some hurdles that they have to meet, and that's where this scheme starts to help.
You mentioned the Innovation Hub in Manitoba. When will that be up and running?
So we're working on it over winter this year, and we'll basically be rolling it out in next summer, the next crop year, and that's going to be a multi-year piece. So again, the Farm of the Future, which we're investing in 3 Farms of the Future globally. New Brunswick was the very first one, but we know that across North America and Canada, Manitoba is very different to New Brunswick. It's a very different growing climate and conditions. So we wanted to really regionalize it and understand what growers' issues in Manitoba are. And, they're not without their issues over the last few crop years. It's been a real difficult time for them. So being able to invest in that way in the region is really important for McCain.
So the program that you've just launched with Farm Credit Canada, how will it help overcome some of these barriers that farmers are facing?
So it is the first of its kind, and I think it's a stepping stone. So it's not the answer. So let me be clear on that. It's not the answer. But I think we've been working with Farm Credit Canada for quite some time. We've got our grower advisory board that we've been talking about what are the barriers, similar to what you were saying earlier. And I think quite honestly, it was like, right, this financial barrier was mentioned a couple of times about investment. So we wanted to see what we could create. Obviously, we don't have access to all the data. So Farm Credit Canada sort of, right, let's have a look. We knew from a lot of the survey work we'd done, a lot of our growers either bank or finance with Farm Credit Canada. So we knew it was a good fit from that side. And then ultimately, where they pick levels and the interest rates and everything else, we were like, right, that's a scheme that we can get involved with. And it's about the match funding, and depending on as they move through the different elements of onboarding right through to expert, unlocking incentives so they can move to that next level. And again, we put a lot of work into surveying to see where growers' gaps are, to say, right, these are the areas that you need to work on to get to the next area. But ultimately, it will unlock, as a high-end grower, up to $14,000 of investment, plus the Farm Credit Canada investment as well. So, it's not insignificant. And certainly as they move through, whether it's enabling cover crops, whether it's looking at new machinery, hopefully it'll help towards that, as well as obviously the borrowing they're taking to do that.
How many growers do you think you might reach with this?
We work with around about 130 farmers in Canada as a whole, and there's no real barrier for any of them to move forward with this. And obviously there is the lending, but we know that Farm Credit Canada has a great reach. So I am very hopeful that we'll be high percentage on the growers being interested and activating. And I think that's important. We've got to activate. If it just sits as a scheme that doesn't actually do anything, that's a failure. So we have got to see that activation. And for the growers that it doesn't reach, I think having the conversations and saying, okay, what will work for you is equally as important. So to your point, is where does this go next? What can we do next to unlock funding for the growers that it does not reach?
Now, as you mentioned, this is part of a much bigger puzzle for McCain's. I mean, you're investing in farms, globally. You're doing innovation hubs. How do you know? How are you going to know when you've made a difference?
I think again, the benefit of the framework that we've created, it is very data driven, and we've tried to make that very measurable, and it is access, on the website you can access that framework and see how it's structured. And that has actually caused a little bit of conflict, because it's sort of, when people talk about sustainability and regen, it's like, okay, what does it mean? And again, ours is not perfect, but it's a start. And we're more than happy to have a discussion around, what's good, what's bad about it. And it's challenging, and we've got challenging goals that we're facing globally. So how will we know we're making a difference? Well, we start to see growers move through that framework. I think that's the first thing. And that is really tangible because there's data behind it. And then secondly, it is about the assured supply. If we start to see more consistent supply year on year, we know that our growers are achieving their goals of hitting their budget or beyond, and we get the supply to make I'm going to make a plug, make the delicious French fries, 52 weeks of the year. So I think they're the two big elements.
Daniel, thank you very much for talking with me today.
No problem at all. I've really enjoyed it.
that was Daniel Metheringham, Vice President of Agriculture for McCain's. He's based in Chicago. That's all we have for you on this week's Between the Rows, but we'll be back again next week. I hope you'll join us. I'm Laura Rance.
Save money, make money with AGI Nico dryers. AGI Nico mixed flow screenless dryers provide 1 to 2 pounds heavier test weight per bushel and require less maintenance than screen dryers. Stainless steel fuel trains mean no rust or corrosion to worry about. AGI Nico Dryer Manager puts remote management and monitoring in your hands. And with 30% in fuel savings, you'll save on every load. That's money in your pocket. Visit aggrowth.com/Nico for more info. That's aggrowth.com/Nico.